Hi there, I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com, and this is my Smart American Accent training. Welcome to our Friday live question and answer class where we take your questions about the American accent. We always talk about a topic and I give you some quick tips that you can use right away to improve your speech. So last week we were talking about common errors that you might have on frequently used words, and we're going to talk about that topic again this week because we didn't get to cover too many of them last week. We had a lot of questions, which is great. Please feel free to ask your questions at any time. You can put them in the chat and I will make sure that I answer them for you. If you're watching this video not live, you can put questions in the comments. I do check back and answer those and send you to the correct area of my website or of my channel page where you can find videos and other help for your questions. So I also wanted to let you know I do have a new online 6-week class. It's called Learn the American Accent in 6 Weeks, and you can get a free trial of that class. I'm really excited to share that with you because it walks you through all of the steps you need for the fundamentals of getting an American accent, and it teaches you step by step how to practice and how to efficiently and effectively change your speech. So you can get a little sneak preview of that and a free trial on my website, speechmodification.com. And it's just a great way to learn the SMART method and make a real change in a short time. So I hope you can check that out. So last week, when we were talking about frequently used words and error patterns you might have, we talked about the word says and the vowel in that word and the final Z sound on that word. And today, the first word I want to look at is the word water. This is a word that, of course, you have to use very frequently. And you may have some errors on this word, and you may also have simply some differences from how Americans say the word water. And knowing about those differences, it can be helpful if you notice that people have trouble understanding you when you're saying the word. So I'm going to write out the word, and the first thing I want to talk about is the R sound at the end of this word. So in American English, whenever we have an R, we say the R sound. So I'm going to definitely be pronouncing water with an water. What you might be doing is two things. Number one, you might be rolling your R, using the R from your native language. It might sound more like water, with a rolled R. Or you might be using what's called the schwa sound, and it would sound more like wada, wada. And that's because in many dialects of English, the R in the middle and ends of words does sound more like So British English, Indian English, English dialects spoken in Africa, they don't always pronounce that R sound the same way as American English. So that's the first thing to know, is working on the R. And let me just show you a brief picture of the first error pattern. So if you have a tendency to use your native language R in this word, it might sound like water, and your tongue is moving up and making your R in the front. And what you need is your tongue to be making the R in the back, the American R sound, water. This isn't something that is quick and easy to fix unless it's just a habit that you don't remember or you're having trouble putting that American R on the word water. I do have an American R playlist where you can go and learn all of the steps you need to get the American R, and I would suggest that that's a good place to start. We will be talking about the American R sound in future classes and helping you develop that sound. And then for the second pattern, using the schwa sound, again, it's a matter of awareness and practicing on words. So I do have a video just about the word water and also many videos, as I said, for the American R. The second pattern I'd like to point out in the word water is the T sound. So in the middle of words in American English, many times we don't actually say a T like T. So I don't say water, water. It sounds more British if I say it that way, water, water. And that's because I'm not using what's called an aspirated T. So a T with a puff of air, an aspirated T, is what we use at the beginning of words in American English. So when I say talk, tell, take, there's a little puff of air there. T, t. But when I say water, I don't use that aspirated T with a puff of air. I use the flap T instead. The flap T has no air. So the puff of air doesn't come out, and it's also voiced. So the aspirated T, has no voicing, but flap T, has voicing. And I can't really make the flap T by itself. I'll make it for you in the word water, water. This is complicated. The quick fix is simply think of that T as being more of a D sound. So try it like this, water, water. And so you may have noticed, okay, yeah, I'm not saying water the same way as Americans. Learning about flap T, when T says T in the middle of words and when it says more of a D sound like in water, is something you can see on my American T videos. And then also here's a specific video I'll put in the chat for you that's just about saying water. And it's a good place to start. Sometimes when I'm talking about accent error patterns, it can be kind of overwhelming to think about everywhere that there's a T in a word or everywhere that's an R in a word, which is why in these classes sometimes I'm focusing just on specific words, because even if you're asking for water in a restaurant and you're pronouncing it in a way that's well understood by Americans, you've made a change in your speech that's going to be helping you. So yes, we do overall want to learn about accent patterns and change them in all of our speech, but it's very valuable to learn it on these words that we use most frequently. The thing to know about the T in water is that if you say the word water, water, with a T sound, most of the time you will be understood. So that's not something you have to change. It's not an error. It's just a different alternative pronunciation for the word water. But it's helpful to know about the American pronunciation. And it's once you know what's happening there, it's not that difficult to try to use that pronunciation. So I saw we had a question from Catherine. We had a comment that my camera was showing mirror image. Yeah, I had that problem last week too, and I'm not certain why that's happening, so I'll have to troubleshoot that for you for next week. And I apologize that that information was shown to you backwards. I will plan ahead and see if I can get that working. Hi, Ahmed, nice to see you. Catherine wants to know the meanings of the word clamp, clamp that you know like a native speaker. Okay, so she's wondering about the meaning of the word clamp. So clamp can be a verb, like I clamp down on something. Clamp can be a noun. A clamp is something that holds something together. I think of it in terms of woodworking or metalworking, where it's a piece of equipment that you can tighten down and it holds down on something. And then we also sort of use, when we're using it as a verb, that can mean technically using a clamp to hold something together. But clamping down can also mean figuratively more like staying focused on it, not letting something slip away, similar to how the literal meaning means that something is not going to be able to move. If I'm figuratively clamping down, for example, on employees, then I'm giving them less freedom and being more adhering to the rules. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but good question. And if I think of more, I'll put that in the comments for you later, Catherine. Shahir wants to know, I find it difficult to pronounce so and show. Do you have some tips for that? Yes. So that's a typical accent error pattern for some Indian languages where the S and SH sound become fairly similar to each other. And so what I recommend is, first of all, trying to make sure that you can say those two sounds separately. So the main difference between the S sound and the SH sound in show is that when I'm saying S, my mouth is not open very much and my lips have no rounding at all. My tongue is behind my teeth and I'm restricting the air. So you can try just that sound by itself. S, and then you can try adding the O to make the word so. S, so. So exaggerating and holding that S sound longer. And then to make the word show and the SH sound, my tongue is in the relatively similar position. It may be a little bit further back and down, but the main difference there is that I'm using lip rounding. So I have to round my lips, shh, shh, and then make the same tongue position. So if I can make s with smiling lips, no rounding, and shh with rounded lips. That's the main difference between those sounds. Then again, I can try making that sound by itself, shh, adding the O, show. Hopefully that will help you with that S and SH sound. You can also practice separate words. So practice lots of words with the S sound, side, sing, so, say, and then practice words with the SH sound, like show, shoe, she, etc. Hopefully that helps you. Great questions today. Feel free to keep asking them. I'm going to go back to our topic of frequently used words that I hear error patterns on. So another pattern that I hear from many of my non-native speaking friends and clients is on words that have multiple syllables. So for example, the word different. Now I was going to write it down, but I guess it's going to be backwards if I do that. So maybe that's not that helpful. I guess I'll have to learn to write backwards for these occasions when my camera's having that issue. Okay, so the word I want to talk about is the word different. And what I often hear is that people will say this word with 3 syllables, and it makes it sound like different. Now, it makes a lot of sense if you look at the written word different. It looks like it should be said different because of the spelling. But in reality, it's actually only 2 syllables, different. And so just knowing that information and making sure you don't have that in the middle is the fix for that sound. And there are many other words that have a similar pattern. So for example, the word interest looks like it should be pronounced interest with 3 syllables, but it's only 2 syllables, interest. And so that's, there's many words like this. I can recommend that you look for more of those words on my website. And then also I have a playlist called Say This, Not That, that points out those and other words that have that tendency to be pronounced with an extra syllable rather than the word with 2 syllables. You can find that. I'll put the playlist in the chat for you so you can take a look at that. And many of the other frequently used words that I'll be talking about in this class, that I talked about last week, and that I'll talk about in the future are also in the Say This, Not That playlist. Okay, you're very welcome. I'm happy to be sharing. Another question from Shahir. Any difference between and an in American accent? So we often, when we're talking in fluent speech, will often say an for the word and that's a reduction that we make. So if I'm saying she and I went there, the cats and dogs were busy. These are not the greatest sentences. I'm making them up as I go. I am not very clear with that D. I am not always saying she and I, she and I. It's an acceptable reduction to say she and I, she and I. But if you're saying the word and by itself, it really should have that D sound. So if I'm saying, for example, can you please send me an email and give me your phone number? Then that and should have the D sound at the end, versus the word and, like an apple, and I, never has a D sound at the end. So you've probably noticed when you're hearing Americans speak that they don't always pronounce the D on and in fluent speech. That's a reduction that we use to make our speech more fluent, but the technical pronunciation does have a D, and we use it when we're trying to be very clear that we're using the word and. Great question. Catherine wanted to know, we're all in our private traps, clamped in them, using clamp here like stuck. Yes, so if you were using clamped in something, it would mean that you are unable to move. Exactly, the trap is clamped shut. Good question. Great, okay, so we talked about a little bit about the word water and the words different and interesting and the errors you might make on those. One last word we'll talk about that's a common word, which I've talked about in lessons before, but I think it's really worth mentioning. You're welcome, Catherine. Is that Just on the very simple word no, I often hear that people will pronounce the word correctly, but they will not pronounce it in the way that Americans do. And the difference here is that in American English, the O vowel is two sounds. So I'm going to attempt to write this backwards so that you'll be able to see it forwards. So the O vowel in American English is actually two vowels going together. So I slide from the O to the vowel. This is the vowel in good and book. So when I'm saying the word no, I really have to slide from N to O to no, no. Now you don't actually have to know this vowel sound and produce it exactly. The quick fix for no is simply to hold your O longer. So just think of your O continuing longer. I guess my N isn't quite backwards. So think of your N continuing, your O continuing longer and say no. And why should you fix this? Well, if you are using just the one vowel O, which is natural because that would probably be the O you have in your native language, it sounds too short to the American listener. It sounds like no, no. And to the American listener, it sounds like perhaps you might be in a rush, or you might be a little bit angry or frustrated. It can sound a little bit rude if you're just using a very short O sound. So to fix that, lengthen your O, say no a little bit longer, and hopefully then saying no will be better received by your American listeners. They won't think something's wrong. Okay. Another question, could you describe the different R sounds in American pronunciation? Yes, so in American pronunciation, we actually pretty much have one R sound, and that's the SPAC R. So I use the same R in the beginnings of words like red and really, as I do in the middle and ends of words. So when if I'm saying person or together or really, I'm always using this same tongue shape for the R. But what also happens with American R is that when it's in the middle of words or at the ends of words, we also sometimes put a vowel before it. So for example, the word or just for that I just used, slides again like with the O from vowel to vowel. It slides from the O to the vowel. So the vowel is the same position, same R sound, but when I'm gliding, I have to make sure that I use both those vowels. So that's where sometimes people run into trouble. Their R in that dual vowel may end up sounding more like a schwa. So then I would be trying to say for, and it would sound like foa, foa. It sounds like an sound, the schwa, instead of the R. So remembering to make that tight back R, just like I mentioned for water, that's simply just the sound. So we have the diphthongs are words like or, air, ire, ear, and then of course in other words, before, hair, etc. So the thing that I recommend if you're working on your American R is to learn just the R at the beginnings of words first, the R sound like that's in person, word, matter, getting that tight back R consistent in those words, and then adding in the element of diphthongs like or, air, ire, etc. I do talk about this in my American R playlist, and I highly recommend checking that out. You can look and see how I recommend building those skills. I had one other thing I wanted to say about the R sound, but I'm forgetting what it is. I'll come back to it if I think of it. Great question, and I hope that helped you with your question about different R sounds in American English. Great, so I also want to let you know I'm currently teaching some local classes here in Bellevue, and we've just started last week. They're on Wednesdays. There's still room to join. You could come in the second week and we could catch you up. And then I'll be teaching again later in the fall and next year if that's something you're interested in. I also do one-to-one training, so if that's something that you'd like to check into, you can get a free consultation, talk to me about what I can provide for you in terms of feedback and training. Those lessons are over Skype, and I do offer a free, or not a free, but a trial lesson that you can check it out. You're very welcome. One more resource that I recommend as a starting point if you're new to my channel, new to SMART training, is my ebook. This is a book that will help you learn to correct the error patterns you might have on the most frequently used word in English, which is the word the. And not only does it help you with that particular word, but it teaches you how changing that word and changing those patterns can help affect even more of your speech. And it includes videos, drawings, MP3 files for practice, and you can get that on my website. I put the link here for you on the chat. It's a great starting point and an entry point for understanding SMART training and accessing the resources that I offer. We had another question. House and house sounds the same. Whether or not house and house sound the same. So when I say house, that has a Z sound at the end. That S says Z, so how's it going? It's gonna run together with it. How's it? How's it? How's things? I wanna make sure I have voicing, but the word house has the S sound, no voicing on the end. So here's an example. How's your house? You should be able to hear and differentiate that house, my voice is on, and house, my voice is not on. Otherwise, those two are the same. The first two sounds in both words are the same. I'm also offering a free training in a couple weeks on the 18th, on Tuesday in Seattle. So I hope you can attend that if you're here in the area. We'll be talking about more frequently used words and the accent error patterns you might have on those, and be sharing resources. I have a calendar on my website, speechmodification.com, with all of my local classes, free and paid classes, so you can check that out. Let's get to a quick tip for today, something you can use right away. So back to those words like different and interesting, where you might have a tendency to say different or interest instead of different and interest. I recommend writing out the word with just the two syllables. So different, instead of writing different, I would write different. That way, when my brain sees it, it remembers it's just different instead of different. And that's going to help me say it the new way. When I see a written word that's linked to the production, the error that I have in my brain, and I'm likely to use my habitual production, we just tend to have a tendency of habits when it comes to how we've always said something. We keep saying it that way. So giving yourself a new way of looking at it and training your brain to remember that new way is very helpful. That's also true with other words that you may be mispronouncing. Changing the spelling that in a way that helps you, or using the IPA symbols like I do in my videos, can also be very helpful. So other words like that for different, interest, you might try it with vegetable. Sometimes I will hear vegetable rather than vegetable, 3 syllables, or basically rather than basically. These can help you. Great, so next week we'll be meeting again at the same time, Friday at noon, and we're going to be talking about the W and V sounds. And of course, as always, taking your questions. So if you have questions that I didn't get to today, please come back next week and ask me, or as I said, you can leave them in the comments, and I'll direct you to where you can find video resources on Speech Modification Seattle or on my website, speechmodification.com. Thanks so much for being here today and for all of your great questions. I really enjoy hearing what you have to say because it helps me improve my videos and my channel to give you what you really need to improve your American accent. So I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com. Remember, if you want to sound American, you can do it. speechmodification.com.